Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, GitLab. This is the 12.5 retrospective, and my name is Christopher Leffeltz. I'm the Senior Director of Development. I am the curator of said retro summary. Really appreciate everybody's feedback. With the US long holiday weekend, I was kind of a little bit concerned going into it, but it's pretty exciting to see that we have notes from 22 different teams associated with this effort. And I'd just like to point out that 2 months ago, we only had 11 of these. So this is pretty exciting to see the team expanding out and also reporting back and giving each other feedback on how to best improve the product. So really excited to see that. We'll always start with updates from previous retrospectives. I didn't see whether Dan is on the line yet. Daniel Croft, are you on the line to update yours? Okay, sounds like Dan is not here. His topic was to document the Think Big meeting structure and basically have a way to update it in our handbook page. So he merged it and it's in the handbook associated with that. Darva, are you available to verbalize your update?
Yes, I am. So I've added a handbook update to pair on issues that are P1, S1 that are very complicated, and there's suggestions and guidelines on when to do that. This came as a result of an Elasticsearch issue that we had, so I'm looking forward to seeing more people pair up. And Chris, back to you.
Thank you very much, Darva. Next one is myself. Basically, we had an issue around workflows needing to be evaluated. I did not get progress made on that, so we'll include that in the next retrospective. And then the next one after that one is around process efficiencies, and Chen's been primarily driving this. So Chen, if you're available, can you verbalize your results so far?
Yes, actually, John did the major work driving this activity, and the epics one epic was created 2-to-1. So all the action items are articulated there, and the next step is to take the top two to implement. So thank you, John.
That's great to see. Thanks for that hard work there. And then last but not least, we wanted to update the release post content, both timelines and also DRIs associated with that. Darby, Frey, if you're available, can you articulate the update?
Sure. Yeah. So last month we added a change to the handbook about making engineering managers the ones that will merge in the release post content. So that merge request was merged in, and there was a couple other links that I added here that describe a manual workflow process for sort of validating issues. And then there's an automation tool that I started that works kind of, but in certain cases it won't always find the correct answer. So it's available for other people to contribute if you want to jump in on it. Otherwise, the manual process is described there as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Darby. It's great to see us adding automation. Let's all remember that wherever we can automate things, particularly for toil work, let's do that because that's super important from that perspective. Cool. Next, we move on to the lightning sections of what went well and what went wrong. And I just summarized these, so I'll be moving very quickly and talking very quickly. So just bear with me through this part of the process. So in the results section, lots of feedback in the section about areas of improvements. The highlights that I saw was, first of all, a number of folks citing productivity improvements around both smaller MRs resulting in faster MR reviews, highest months for a number of teams, or at least a couple of teams, and less missed deliverables in a few teams as well. We also added a second DB maintainer, which I'm super excited about, adding more maintainers to that part of the process. And UX completed 3 additional UX scorecards, which is super exciting to see from that perspective. In the efficiency section, this is section 2, we focused on additional maintainers, which is super important because as we're doubling in size, we need to double the maintainers about it. And we've also seen some areas where we've had some better reliability, or at least seen some better reliability from that perspective of the CI. Next in collaboration, we had both a customer issue and security issues, which was a rapid action issue. Both of those saw some really good collaboration in a crisis situation. So really good to see the team pull together in those situations. And then also both verify testing and defend have an alignment on direction, which is good to see, making sure that teams are moving effectively in that regard. An update around team calls that in particular Geo, they've gotten so effective at async that they use the Geo time for socialization, which is still super important to working at GitLab and an important part of the process, but important to see that we can do things effectively in an async fashion. So that's great to see. Next up in the process section, the Patrick's team has been pretty excited about their new process and working in a Kanban-y type of fashion. And then in the reference architecture and performance test coverage, we got our 50K reference architecture certified, which is super cool. So we're able to give customers the right set of things. So our support is better associated with that. And then we also have better reporting associated with that. And then we've added some additional measurements and capabilities around our pipeline stability. In particular, we're measuring it, which allows us to figure out how we can improve. And then the other part is we're actually thinking about how we can improve that. So that's great to see. Now we go on to the what went wrong section, and this will again be pretty lightning round again. But just to note, this section is usually longer because we do focus on how to improve a lot more than we focus on our successes. That's not to say that we aren't being successful. That's saying that we just focus in those areas because we want to improve. In the efficiency section, there's lots of feedback around efficiency. This is one of the areas we recognized the last 2 releases, so we're definitely focused on it. We're excited to see the results from John's work, which hopefully will address some of that, because there's definitely some feedback around MR reviews, rushing of features, and one comment at the end, which I'll probably dig into over the next period, which is a case where MRs are being potentially broken up too much, where there's a dependency structure being built out, and that's causing issues. And last but not least, pipeline issues associated, pipeline feedback or issues with pipelines being challenging. So we'll be looking at that as well. In the collaboration section, unintended changes that were fortunately caught. This is a good example of why we need code reviews and why we need reviews of things in general. I actually debated about whether this really should be in this section. It's interesting that we got recommendations that didn't actually work out, but it's great that we caught it beforehand. So that's great to see from that perspective. And then in the customer experience section, we did have a customer who experienced some data loss, so that's obviously problematic. Good to see that we're working on these specific problems to that. And then auto DevOps being broken for a couple of days obviously affects our productivity. So that's something that we want to make sure we're working to build a better monitoring dashboard around that and effectively manage. In the planning section, a lot of team improvement focuses, making sure we plan appropriately, escalations affecting our ability to deliver on what we committed to for the release. Please remember, if we have an escalation and that's a reprioritization, that's the right thing to do. So it's good to bring those up here, but also understand that those are the trade-offs that we're going to make as a business, and it's important to see that we're actually dealing with security issues as quickly as possible. So making the right prioritization call is super important. And then in section 5 of our line item 5 of the section, deployments to staging Canary in production, we're seeing that it's getting slowed down. And potentially we could speed up here if we had more frequent deployments to staging. So that's something we need to potentially look into. And then last 2 sections are around both flaky masters and notifications and pipeline triage rotations. And Mac, I don't know if you could summarize this better for us, because this kind of came in at the last minute.
Sure, happy to. So Lucas, are you here? Would you like to vocalize your point first?
Yes, it wasn't raised by me, but it has been raised in the secure retro and by a few folks from the secure stage. So just the noise to signal ratio in our channels where we are notified about broken masters and similar issues is not very good, and it leads to developers either muting that channel or just maybe even leaving the channel altogether, which makes it even worse for the situation because less eyes on broken master to actually fix it. yeah, and so this potentially hurts our velocity stability and the ability to assess the risk.
Yes, I add an improvement item directly after at the end to address the notification specifically. We're going to look into others as well. I'm going to take on the rest of the updates here. So the engineering productivity is well aware of this, and allude to flaky masters. We actually added a lot more debug charts to know to find out what are the flavors of the errors. Everything ranges from karma to static analysis, and also the PG integration tests. We made some improvements here, but please be aware that we are actively looking deeply into it. Next point I have is, on one occasion, code has been merged in master even with static analysis failing, and it is also contributing to flaky masters as well. And I think it's because of the output isn't shown. I was just made aware of this recently, so I'll be asking the EV team to look deeper into why this was the case, and potentially, and also address locking down the gates further as well. Moving on to the pipeline trash rotation. So this continues to be overwhelming for the quality engineering department with the software engineering tests. Even with 2 people on rotation, it's a full-time job for 2 people. And we're looking into how to better provide reports to unblock ourselves. And also, in addition to failing tests, there are also statement timeouts and runners as well. So there are potentially underlying infrastructure issues that we need to root cause out in the near term. So that's a summary of the updates in this section.
Thanks, Mac. Appreciate that. We'll now move on to the how we can improve section. This is the section where we get a little more conversational. We've got about 15 minutes left for that and add additional action items, so we're roughly on time. Matt, if you're available, would you like to talk about retrospect participation?
Yeah, Matt's not on the call, but I can help answer the monitor specific ones. But basically, it seems like we're having a hard time with the monitor APM team participation in the retro issue. So Matt's going to try to do a better job of reminding people earlier on so we can collaborate better.
Thanks, Clement. Appreciate that. And then Thong Khan, who I don't believe is on the phone because he's in Australia, and I think it's 2 o'clock in the morning, or let's say early in the morning. Basically, they've have orchestration scheduling both a monitoring dashboard and alerting for auto DevOps. Basically, that issue we mentioned before. So they've got that scheduled for 12/7. So that's encouraging to see that we're going to fix that in the next couple of months. Allison Brown, are you available to articulate the one on collaboration?
I'll speak on the monitor ones for Allison as well. Yeah, so Allison brought up a really good point here, saying that since we're starting to do more error tracking on the monitor health side, so having some kind of GDK seeding would make it easier to test it, as well as for review times, since people may not be as familiar with this feature. And so we've created an issue to investigate this effort, and we're going to try to get it investigated and hopefully something in there for 12.7.
Cool. And this is one of the areas that we actually have some focus on in FY21 planning for a team to be better managing the situation. So it's encouraging to hear that there's some needs around this. I also added this as an action to check to basically address for our next retro, because we don't want to wait for that team. We want to basically get on these things, and it feels like a good one for us to track. Rachel had the next one. Basically, she's talking about the fact that when they're finding issues outside of Geo, that they'll oftentimes it'll affect their ability to deliver, because they're going to basically have to go outside of their team to basically get something done. Basically, her comment is that there's a give and take here. Sometimes you should definitely go and fix the issue yourself, particularly if that other team is prioritized in a way that doesn't allow your team to move forward. But also, you should be talking to that team to make sure that the work's getting prioritized by that team if they can manage it. So it's a little bit of give and take there, but we want to optimize so that teams feel like they're empowered to go fix things in other areas of the code base. But at the same time, if possible, get the work prioritized by the team that's managed that particular part of the code. CZ, are you available to articulate the next one?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So during the Elasticsearch React action, one of the issues that we found was the testing infrastructure. So on the one hand, we want to make sure on the dev side we have enough unit test coverage, and on the other hand, we want to collaborate with other teams, like testing, AppSec team, to put efforts on automate the issue that we have found during that rep action. I think we hope we can catch the issues as much as possible by ourselves before we hit to the outside. And also, as we're making the change, we want to make sure we can catch a regression as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Cool, that makes a lot of sense. Good observation. The next one is Nico's, which I don't think is on the phone, but he's working on identifying cross-team dependencies in advance of the milestone, make sure that we use the workflow blocked metric or the workflow block labels so that we can better know what's been blocked based on either cross-team collaboration or other factors. Clement, you've got the next couple.
Yeah, planning still is a little bit of a challenge for the monitor health team specifically. It's been a little bit difficult to figure out on a board, give visibility for work that aren't specifically scheduled for the milestone, that part of the planning specific to the stage. So examples would be like working group work. So Tristan's been working on the Webpack working group, wanting to help drive that, but it's a little bit hard to surface that. So needing better collaboration in the planning process has been identified. So we're going to try to do that, have that conversation early on so that engineers can bring up things that they would like to be part of the planning board as the first step to resolving this issue. And the second one from the PM side, it's been a little bit hard to manage kind of the planning board since we have like 25 plus issues, which includes deliverables as well as some small improvements to fill in the cracks in case deliverables finish early. So there's different interesting challenges here. And we pointed out that we have the workflow board that we're going to try to use to help visibly see kind of how issues are progressing. These are dependent on engineers updating the labels as well, which we've been trying to get better at, as well as scoping down to an issue being, small enough to understand that in dev means like how long it's going to take versus a big issue in dev could be a long time. We're also considering experimenting with another approach to the planning board. So scoping features in columns, encouraging engineers to break down the features into smaller iterations, which will also funnel into the workflow board, being a little bit easier to understand because issues will generally take around the same time versus currently the workflow board will tell you where things are being in development, but not necessarily accurately telling you how close it is or how long it may take. So that's kind of the issues and how we're trying to resolve those.
Cool. One observation is it might be worthwhile to talk to I believe it's the managed team's user experience researcher or somebody from user experience. If we think that there's a feature or a piece of functionality that would help, that would be good feedback to get back into the product from that perspective as we were kind of going through that. In particular, scale of these boards is definitely something we should be thinking about in particular. Cool. Craig, do you want to articulate yours from memory?
Sure. Yeah. We still have a growing team and we're still iterating on the best ways to commit to issues in milestones. And one of them, we talked about spending a little more time planning and fleshing out stories before picking them up. We talked about different ways that we could bring them up. Like we have office hours a couple days a week where we just have an open Zoom channel to pair and maybe use some of this time to talk about some of the stories, ask some questions and iterate on it within GitLab so we can provide assumptions, provide an approach and just kind of work through it. And also we amended our team meeting agenda to make sure that we call out the asynchronous items that we need to follow up with after the team meeting. So we're just iterating on ideas on how to better understand the issues that we are committing to within milestones.
That sounds great. Good that the team is focusing on that because it's super important. CJ is not available. His team is looking at basically for trivial changes, looking at a one approval model associated with it. So this is an example where the team is experimenting with, for trivial things, can we actually, without regressing or causing quality issues, go to a 1 approval model as opposed to a 2 approval model? Nick, Nguyen, are you available to articulate your area for improvement?
Yes. Yeah, as a fairly new manager, I didn't fully understand the complexity of the security MR process and scheduled too many for this milestone, even though in and of themselves the security fixes were fairly small, but there was a lot of overhead in the process. So I think maybe it won't always be possible, but whenever it is possible, we can better spread out those security MRs across security issues across milestones.
Cool, makes sense. John Hope.
We had like probably more than normal slipped issues in our slipped deliverables in this milestone, and there was some good discussion in the retrospective about why that might have been. But Gabe came up with a good suggestion here that we might want to record historical data on our team pages to give better predictability to PMs and EMs as they kind of like try to figure out how much feature work versus how much technical debt we can pay off in a milestone. The sort of result of over allocation isn't just that we have less predictability, but it's also that it's a busier board, so that slows us down.
Cool, makes sense. Jen, you may want to hit me up to talk about how we can potentially dig in on some more additional information. There's a bunch of different ways we could potentially look at like MR time to merge and those kinds of things where we might want to isolate it to your team to kind of look at those aspects. Cool. Stephen Wilson, you got the next point?
Yes, sir. This was our first time through with the recent change to make engineering managers merge the release posts. And so we were successful. We had some last minute scrambling on sort of which things were going to actually make the release and have a post. So I think to improve this next time around, if we spend some more time up front figuring out which things are going to be release worthy and get them properly labeled and then follow them more closely so that we don't have sort of a scramble at the end to get statuses and things all in place and buttoned up for the release post.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that. We'll quickly move through the efficiency section. Craig, you're back up.
Yeah, so in addition to amending our team meeting to add the asynchronous items, we also talked about time boxing because we have a tendency to rabbit hole on interesting and confusing problems, complex problems is probably a better term. So coming up with ways to time box, I'm happy to be the time box police and even sharing a Slack message right now with different apps that we can use to share like a stopwatch in the background or something. So we'll figure out a way to make it more visible.
Speaking of which, we're on a countdown clock. We're at 7 minutes before the bottom half of the hour. Nicholas Click, you're up. Nicholas sounds like he's not here. So he's basically talking about the fact that velocity, both solution validation and engineering execution could be improved, and they're going to try to introduce weights associated with efforts, which a lot of teams have found super effective at getting a better idea of size associated with that. Nick Nguyen, you're back up.
Sure, yeah, we had some issues with context switching between working on different integrations in the milestones. So just for the future, if possible, we want to work with product to try to group work on different integrations together and try to allow an engineer to focus on a specific integration for that milestone to reduce context switching. So we found that even if the issue itself is straightforward, there's overhead in learning a new integration and also just switching over to developing on it.
Cool, thanks, Nick. And Thomas, bring us home in onboarding for this section.
Sure, happy to. So within Defend, one of the things that was noted and we knew going on into it is that Defend will be building on top of and leveraging features that are within other stages. And that created a challenge for us in onboarding new engineers, especially since we're in the infant stage of the infant portion of this particular stage. So that led it to the onboarding experience being way too steep for new starters. One of the things that, and because of, and that was one of the commentaries that items that came up as a part of our retrospective, was that we were too late in getting a curated set of resources available for people that were joining. The response to that is to create what is affectionately referred to as a week 2 onboarding issue. So a template has been, a version 1 issue template has been created for that to aid with this process. We will be iterating on this going forward, as this has been identified as the sources that engineers need to get started within Defend. And as we start to complete our first series of issues, we will do a retrospective on what additional resources were needed for them to finish their assignments, and we'll continue to improve this going forward to hopefully make it easier as we continue to mature as a stage.
Cool. This is super important because onboarding is one of the most difficult parts of any company's growth. And given the rapid growth, this is good to see. I encourage everybody, all team members in various sections and directors in particular, to think about, do we need a week 2 specific to a section? And then also make sure that we're basically cultivating anything that we view as common, so that all team members are kind of getting up to speed appropriately. Cool. We'll move on to improvements for the next release to track. I'm going to just go ahead and quickly summarize here the ones that I found and kind of added given the short time span we have. So particularly the fulfillment team, they've recognized above that they're having with MR and pajamas, they were seeing an underlying issue associated with it. It feels like this is a potentially systemic issue. So I'm going to go and add an issue here to track and see if there's a way. They basically want to do an estimated or cause a delay of the estimated weight, they say. So we'll need to see if there's something we can do that's more common to fix associated with that. And then above, we talked a little bit about the GDK seeding work. Felt like that's a good one for us to track and make sure everybody's using effectively, because it's pretty much group wide associated with that. Also, going to the single reviewer experiment feels like a good one, where we should report back on what happened over that month, because that may be something other teams want to think about, again, for trivial, but making sure that the right criteria for trivial is understood from that perspective. And then the flaky pipelines, MEC has a couple of issues there. One is in particular, development's gotten really noisy, so let's see how we can potentially reduce that, and then also understand why code was merged with static analysis failing, and see if we can get improvements associated with that. And then last but not least, there were 2 additional items to track, which well, the one was around review efficiencies, which is an ongoing process. And the other one was the one that I missed from last time, which is around a particular part of the workflow needing to be evaluated and determine whether or not we can either reduce steps or automate steps associated with that. Are there additional items that we would like to track at a high level to report on at the next retro? Are there additional topics or feedback we need from this retro? All right. Thanks everybody for another great retro. Really appreciate the summary, and everybody have a great day.